Julian, when I grow up, I want to be like you, you know. So uh, it's amazing what the ground she has covered, and it's very interesting too because we didn't talk before our talks were prepared. So I prepared my remarks, and I thought, oh, she's giving my talk. That's great. I don't have to say much, which is actually helpful given the time we have, so that we can leave some time for questions. So I'm going to time myself a little bit so that I don't feel compelled to cover things on the ground that Dr. Holt Lunsted has covered. But as I was thinking about what to say here, I just returned from India after a long flight. I was in Boston for a couple of days, and there was a lot of celebration going on because they just went through elections in India. More than 600 million people voted. It's not, if you think about the electorate, it's like 2 times the population of the United States. It's a huge democratic enterprise, successfully executed. So people were celebrating. And I was going through my meetings with various people, ministries. There was one person in particular who is one of the senior most officers in the government, has been asking me for almost a year and a half now to intervene in this city in Western India, northwestern India, a city called Kota, which is what we call as a tutorial college capital of the world. So everything in India takes place through competitive exams. You want an admission in a college, you write competitive exams. You want a job, you go through some competitive exams. And millions of people take these exams. So it's like you take GREs or whatever, right? But millions on every step of the way. What it does is puts tremendous amount of stress on the students, right? Imagine competing with millions of others for those 40 or 50 or 60 openings, whether it's in a college, whether it's for a job. And so I was asked to develop a curriculum to make them happy. What the heck can I say? If you do not understand the stressors, there's nothing you can do about the stress itself, right? I can't do anything to make them happy if I don't deal with the larger issue of culture, of competitive nature, the competition for jobs, the stress, the cultural stress from parents to succeed, and the society which fosters something like that. And that's what I want to focus on. I think Julian did a fantastic job talking about it. So what does it really mean when we talk about happiness? What is a good life, right? And this entire notion, right? And the way we converse about happiness, right? I think I don't have to say much about it since Julian covered about it. It is about that individual striving, right? It is about personal growth. It's about improving oneself. It is having those positive emotions. It is getting that sense of meaning and purpose in life. It's all about that one person, about myself, right? Even our contemplative practices, and I quoted Thich Nhat Hanh earlier, the profound sayings of Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Vietnamese monk, also about this notion of meditation and mindfulness for personal growth and improvement. Even definitions, and there are tons of these definitions of happiness around there, including by my colleague, Tyler Vanderweel, who talks about flourishing rather than happiness. Again, mostly about life satisfaction, mental health and physical health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, close social relationships, which Julian just mentioned, but it's again from an individual perspective, right? And that's great. And by the by, I'm not against it. Don't misunderstand me, right? I'm not against it. It is important to do that, so that, right? And we focus on practices that makes individuals happy and joyful, and it's absolutely necessary to do that, right? But these assumptions can be challenged, as Julian has so eloquently done, right? Because we are not autonomous agents, even though we do have a sense of personal agency, right? Our subjective feelings are important, but we have to move away in what we in the US call as a log cabin myth. The idea, it comes from President Abraham Lincoln, who was born in a log cabin, but who goes on to become the President of the United States. Indeed, it is correct. It's possible. It can be done. But that's not always the case, right? And somehow we have to move away from it, What we need is a sense of a different way of direction, right? So there have been some great corrections to this notion. If you go and look at the happiness literature, and as Julian said, again, I don't have to spend a lot of time on it, is we are social, right? The World Health Organization defines health and well-being as not merely an absence of disease, right? But complete state of well-being, physical, psychological, and social. And social. That we often forget. Social, right? And what I mean by that is, if you think about social well-being, we just heard it's integration into the society. It's association. It comes with our connections to either the society, other individuals, families, groups, institutions, etc., right? Again, we don't have to go through the entire bullet point series. The point is, we are happier when we are connected to other people. We define health in connection to what others are feeling, right? If that is the case, if we talk about the association, social relations, as opposite to, in opposition to loneliness, and connections, then there is a very sound argument to talk about collective well-being, right? I'm a student of communication, so I believe in framing and reframing things, right? So that's what I do, right? So I want to reframe and add to this notion of happiness about collective well-being, not just about individual well-being, right? What we mean by that is we are happy being when others are happy, right? That's fundamentally important to know, right? We are not happy if others are miserable, right? If we can understand that, that takes us in a very different direction, right? Than what is usually done, right? So why is it important to talk about collective well-being now, more than at any other time, right? Julian mentioned the digital revolution. I and my colleague Laura have been doing a lot of work in this area. I think the positive feature is it connects us across geographies, time, sense of space. We are so fortunate to be here at this point in time with this digital revolution, right? None of us can do anything without this in our hand, right? We are lucky, right? At the same time, there are challenges associated with it, right? And the question is, how do we tap into that? Collectively, not individually. No amount of solution which suggests that don't spend too much time on social media is going to do that, right? And in fact, a lot of people use social media for the good. It improves their sense of connection, which when they feel isolation from other parts of society. So the digital revolution, aging societies, believe it or not, despite the common sense notion the world as a whole is growing healthier. We are living longer thanks to the biomedical life sciences revolution. But that means we are also growing older, right? You know, that, how do we handle aging? When we talk about collective well-being, we put them in the nursing homes, get them and forget about them, visit them once in 2 weeks? Or is it something else? Is it in a different way, right? You know, and I won't spend any time on loneliness, much more better done with by Julian. But about persistent inequalities, this is the heart of what I do, what I think, what keeps me awake in the night is this persistent inequalities. These are inequalities by design. These are not inequalities that occur naturally. In fact, we use the term social determinants of health in our field. Social determinants is a wrong phrase because there's nothing deterministic about inequalities. It is by design, right? It is by our policies. The way we organize our society leads to inequalities. It's not natural. It is in our hands to change it, right? Again, it's important to really put inequalities front and center, right? And of course, as Julian started mentioning the global conditions. You know, if we talk about conflicts within nations, across nations, about forced migration, you take something like this. This is involuntary. I talked about my own personal life as an immigrant from India to US, purely voluntary. I had a choice. I was lucky. I was taken care of by my professors. But this is forced migration. Think about what does happiness mean when you have been dislocated, displaced, when you don't know where your next meal is coming from, when you're supposed to spend your time in the schools, you're spending time in some refugee camp. What does happiness mean there? If they are not happy, are we going to be happy? Again, it's a notion of collective well-being, right? It's not about individual well-being, right? Again, so we have been looking at the literature, and I won't spend time in a group like this talking about it, but trying to understand what does collective well-being mean. It's interesting. There are not many studies on collective well-being, right? Most of the focus has been individual well-being, to some extent community well-being, to some extent, but not a lot on this collective well-being, right? But what we mean by that, this is our working definition, is an idea that individual happiness is nested within larger collectives within which individuals experience these positive emotions, feelings, and find their purpose and meaning in life, but only nested as a part of larger society, which you just saw, the social ecological model that Julian talked about, right? There are various dimensions to it, one of which is this our connection, this spatial notion of our connections, social integration versus social isolation. And it's not new. Durkheim, the great French sociologist, talked about it. What, 200 years ago maybe? I may be getting my years mixed up here, right? The idea of integration, connection to society is very important, right? How is society connected to each other, right? When we talk about culture, the movement that brought Sylvia and Luigi together here and us, this notion of culture. We who are in empirical social science are somewhat uncomfortable with culture because we cannot measure it, right? You will hear from some great people today and tomorrow. But culture is so fundamental, thinking about culture, right? Anthropologists talk about it, and issues of equity and inclusiveness. As I mentioned earlier, let us think about who is not in this room as we discuss this. Who is not sitting with us here, right? So when we talk about inclusiveness, we got to think, especially in our country, we are going through this great crisis now of profound racism, questioning, anything other than a certain race, right? And I fear often, you know. But the question is, it has to be, it's not just the what people are, politically correct thing to do. It is the correct thing to talk about inclusiveness, right? How do we make it participatory? How do we make it participatory, not designed by elites and top down? I remember, looking at researchers who come to India or Africa or wherever they go, do research, what we call as safari researchers. They go in there, collect the data, and then they leave and publish their papers, right? How is it participatory? We design a lot of interventions for the communities. Is the community participating in the design of these interventions, in the defining that problem? That's what democracy is about, right? Lastly, mobility and opportunity. As I said, I had the profound luck of being provided the right opportunities by my professors when I was struggling, right? And I feel I'm lucky. A lot of us are privileged and lucky that way, right? Right. But Raj Chetty's work was cited by Julian. It's about opportunities, that life chances that one gets. It should not be dependent on where you are born, as we say in the US, a zip code or your genes or the family you are born in. But can we provide those opportunities to everybody, irrespective of their background, etc., right? So the social relations part again has been covered, so I won't talk about it. Let's talk about the cultural capital, the aesthetics, right? And in this, there has been a lot of attention on digital media. And as we have been working and focusing on, it's just not about ill-being. We have to also focus on well-being. We have held 2 meetings, one in Lugano and one at Harvard, focusing on also. For example, if you are a minority youth, you are much more likely to find strength online than offline. Offline, you are actually being bullied and attacked, right? So well-being and ill-being are equally important, and already strength of weakness has been talked about, but also digital media can be used effectively for advocacy, right? So that's another way to think about this, right? Last, I also want to talk about communication inequality, challenges of equity. These are from the World Happiness Report and a few other reports. These data are very clear. People are happier in richer countries than poorer countries, however you define happiness. However you define happiness, right? In fact, and some countries don't even have data from them. This is what we call as data absenteeism. Data absenteeism is when we don't even bother collecting data from some groups and some countries because they're difficult. They're hard to reach. As we call them, they're hardly reached, right? So how do we make sure data are collected from everyone else, right? In communication itself, in fact, when we talk about opportunities, it's just not about equality. We can have policies about equality, but they still, as you can see to the left, they can still, the disparities or the inequalities can still remain. When I say opportunity, the opportunity is to the right, where everybody can be brought up to a certain level. Right? That's what we want to focus on when we talk about collective well-being. The last, I'm a communication scientist. I study inequalities in communication. That's what I do. And there are profound inequalities, despite the fact we all have access to this, there are profound inequalities in digital services globally, access to digital services. And the data are there. And so these digital inequalities in digital services can contribute to inequalities in health. And you can't read these data, but these data show globally who has access to internet. It is always people who are higher education, higher income, globally, who have access to internet or digital services. When there are these data, we have shown these data again and again and again and again. Again, what do we mean by digital revolution, promoting well-being, if we don't put equity issue front and center, right? So, and during COVID, this came out so palpably, right? COVID, digital media were a life source for us for connecting with other people. But not everybody had access to digital services. If you send children home from school for 2 years, if each family has 3 kids, 1 computer, limited access to broadband, what kind of well-being are we talking about? Right? Right? So it's really critical to think through these issues, right? So the challenge of what I mean by well-being is, it's not easy if you don't define it. It's not easy if you don't mobilize people to study this. So I will end here. So where do we go from here? What do we do? Because I want to leave at least a few questions for Julian. I want to end this with beautiful quote, because this is what matters at the end of the day. The gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and the destruction of the redwood and the loss of our natural wonder in a chaotic sprawl. Yet it does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play, the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages. It measures, in short, everything except that which makes life worthwhile. By a former senator who unfortunately would have been a great president, Robert Kennedy, right? To me, as we think about happiness, this is what we want to think about. What is a good life? What is it that makes life worth living? To me, it is this collective well-being. When others are happy, we are happy. When others are not happy, we are not happy. Let me end it here. Thank you for your indulgence. Thank you.